Sometimes the door that closes behind you is the only reason you find the one that was waiting all along. A 74-year-old man and his wife sit in a rusted pickup truck on a back road in rural Kentucky. Everything they own is in the bed of that truck. They have $7 left. Not in the bank. On Earth. Their landlord sold the house out from under them. No family stepped forward. No government check arrived. They are driving with no destination, just looking for somewhere to sleep. Then they see it. An abandoned grain mill on a dead piece of county land. A faded sign nailed to the door reads, "For sale." $1. They pay it. Push open the rotting door. And the old man's foot breaks through the floor. Beneath the boards is a sealed stone staircase leading down into darkness. But what waited at the bottom of those stairs? If the story satisfies you, subscribe and follow for more. His name was Harold Sayer, 74 years old. Retired from a plastics factory in Owensboro where he'd worked 31 years on the same floor, running the same press, clocking in at the same time every morning. His wife, Eunice, had been beside him for 52 of those years. Not behind him, beside him. That matters. Because when I tell you what happened next, you need to understand something. These two didn't just love each other. They held each other up. And when the ground falls out from under you, that's the only kind of love that means anything. Now here's how they ended up in that truck. Their landlord, a man named Gene Platt, owned the little two-bedroom house Harold and Eunice had been renting for 11 years. It wasn't much. Cracked foundation. A kitchen window that didn't close all the way in the winter. But it was theirs in every way that mattered. They'd painted the walls, fixed the porch railing, planted flowers along the front walkway that Eunice watered every single morning. Harold had replaced the kitchen faucet twice with parts he bought himself. Eunice had hung curtains she sewed from fabric she found at a thrift store in Bowling Green. 11 years of making someone else's property feel like home. That's what they had. Then one Tuesday in March, Gene Platt knocked on the door at 7 in the morning. He didn't sit down. Didn't take off his hat. He told them a developer from Louisville had bought the whole block. Harold and Eunice had 14 days to leave. Harold asked if there was anything they could do. Gene shook his head and said, "It's done, Harold. I'm sorry." Then he left. Didn't even close the door behind him. 14 days. That's what 52 years of paying rent on time got them. Now, believe me, Harold tried. He called the county. He called legal aid. He sat on hold for 3 hours with a housing assistance line that eventually disconnected him. He called back, got a different person, explained the whole thing again. That person transferred him. The line went dead. He drove to the courthouse and waited in a plastic chair for 2 hours to see a housing advocate who told him there was a 6-month wait list for emergency placement. 6 months. He had 14 days. Eunice called their son, David, in Indianapolis. He didn't pick up. She left a message. Called again the next day. He texted back 2 words. "Can't help." She called their daughter, Karen, in Tennessee. Karen said she was sorry, but she didn't have room. She had the kids. She had her husband's mother staying with them. There was no space. No space. For your own parents. Let that sit for a moment. Harold didn't talk about it. He went quiet for 2 days. Eunice knew what that meant. She'd seen it before. When the factory closed. When the pension got cut. When the doctor told him his knee needed replacing and the insurance wouldn't cover half of it. Harold went quiet when the world hit him in a place he couldn't fix with his hands. So Harold did what men like Harold do. He didn't shout. He didn't break anything. He got up early on the last morning in that house, packed 1 suitcase for the 2 of them, and unscrewed a photograph from the hallway wall. It was their wedding picture. Black and white. Eunice in a dress her mother made. Harold in a borrowed suit that was too big in the shoulders. He put it in the suitcase between 2 folded shirts and zipped it shut. Eunice stood in the kitchen doorway. She looked at the flowers through the window. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Harold walked past her, touched her shoulder, and carried the suitcase to the truck. They loaded up. It didn't take long. Most of what they owned belonged to the house. The furniture came with the rental. The dishes were cheap. The television was 12 years old and not worth carrying. They left it all. Harold counted what they had. $7. Coins and crumpled bills from the bottom of a coffee can they kept on the refrigerator. That was everything. No savings account. No pension left. Medical bills from Harold's knee surgery 2 years earlier had eaten every cent they'd put away. $312 a month in payments for 18 months. By the time the bills stopped, so did the money. They drove south with no destination. Harold figured maybe they could find a church that would let them sleep in a hall for a few nights. Maybe a shelter. Maybe a rest stop with a roof over the picnic tables. Eunice held the suitcase on her lap like it was a child. She didn't cry. Harold kept checking the rearview mirror like something was following them. Nothing was. That was the worst part. Nobody was coming after them because nobody cared enough to follow. It was getting dark when Eunice saw the mill. Harold almost drove past it. She grabbed his arm and said, "Stop!" It sat back from the road about 50 yards. An old grain mill. 2 stories. Half the roof caved in. Weeds up to the windows. A rusted chain across the dirt path leading to it. And nailed to the front door, a sign so faded you had to squint to read it. For sale. $1. Contact Harlan County Clerk. Harold looked at it. Looked at Eunice. She said, "We have $7, Harold. That leaves $6. He pulled a dollar coin from his pocket. Walked up to the door. Tried the handle. It didn't budge. So he pushed. Hard. The hinges screamed. But the door swung open. Inside, the mill was exactly what you'd expect. Dust so thick it hung in the air like fog. Fallen beams across the floor. Animal tracks in the dirt. Old machinery rusted into shapes you couldn't recognize anymore. But Harold wasn't there to admire the place. He was there because he had nowhere else to go. He stepped carefully. The floor groaned under him. Eunice stayed near the door, holding the flashlight from the truck's glove box. Harold made it about 10 feet in when his right foot went straight through a board. He dropped hard, caught himself on a beam with both hands. Eunice screamed from the doorway. Harold pulled his foot free, looked down into the hole, and stopped. Below the broken board, there was stone. Not dirt, not wood, cut stone. Steps. A staircase leading down into pitch black. Harold knelt and leaned closer. Cold air rose from the opening. Not damp, not musty, clean cold, like a cellar that had been sealed for a very long time. He told Eunice to stay by the door. She said no. He said it again. She said, "Harold, I followed you for 52 years. I'm not stopping now." So they went down together. Harold lit his cigarette lighter. The flame threw shadows on the walls. The staircase was narrow, 12 steps. At the bottom, the space opened up. A room, bigger than Harold expected. Much bigger. The walls were cut stone, not poured concrete. This wasn't a root cellar. This was something someone had built on purpose. The ceiling was low but solid. Iron braces held the beams in place. And against every wall, stacked from floor to nearly the ceiling, were wooden crates. Military style. Sealed with nails and metal bands. Dozens of them. Maybe more. Harold's hand was shaking. Not from fear. From the cold. He walked to the nearest crate and tried to pry it open. The nails held. He found a loose spike on the floor and used it as a lever. The lid came up with a crack that echoed off the stone. Inside was a barrel. Small. Maybe 15 gallons. Sealed tight. Dark with age. And on the side, stamped into the wood in faded black ink, a date. 1919. Harold didn't know what he was looking at. Not yet. He called Eunice over. She looked at the barrel, then at the crates lining the walls. She counted, stopped at 40 and said, "There's more behind those." They spent the next hour opening crates. Everyone held the same thing. Sealed bourbon barrels. Different sizes. Different dates. 1919. 1922, 1925, 1929, 1931. Some had markings Harold couldn't read. Some had numbers scratched into the wood by hand. All of them were sealed. All of them were cold to the touch. On the far wall, Harold found something carved into the stone. A name, Ames, and below it, a date, 1931. The letters were deep, cut with a chisel. Whoever put them there meant for them to last. They didn't sleep that night. They sat on the mill floor above the basement, eating bread bought with $1 of their remaining 6. The bread was stale. Neither of them mentioned it. Eunice said, "What do you think it all means?" Harold said, "I think somebody hid this a long time ago and never came back for it." That was close enough to the truth. The next morning, Harold drove to the county clerk's office in Harlan. He filed the $1 purchase. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, barely looked up, stamped it, handed him a receipt. Harold asked if there were any records on the property. She sighed, pushed her chair back, and pulled a thin file from a cabinet in the back room. The mill had been owned by a man named Virgil Ames. He'd operated it as a working grain mill from 1920 to 1933. County records showed he had 2 employees. Paid his taxes on time until 1932. Then nothing. In 1933, Virgil Ames disappeared. No death certificate. No forwarding address. No note. The property was seized for unpaid taxes. Condemned. Resold at auction 3 times over the next 50 years. Every buyer walked away. No one ever developed it. No one ever stayed long enough to find what was underneath. Harold drove back to the mill. He told Eunice what he'd found. She looked at the floor, at the hole his foot had made, and said, "Virgil Ames. He was a bootlegger, wasn't he?" Harold nodded. "I think so," she said. "And nobody ever came looking for this?" Harold shook his head. "Not in almost 100 years." That afternoon, Harold went to the public library in town. He used the phone book to find a bourbon appraiser in Lexington, a man named Dale Whitfield. Harold called him from the library phone, told him he'd found some old barrels in a basement. Didn't say how many, didn't say how old. Dale sounded polite but uninterested. Said it was probably homemade moonshine in mason jars. He told Harold he'd come take a look the following week, more as a favor than anything else. Harold hung up the phone and sat in the library for a while. He didn't read anything. He just sat there, thinking about what was underneath that mill, thinking about how a man could hide something that big and never come back for it, thinking about what kind of trouble makes a man disappear and leave a fortune behind. That night, Harold and Eunice sat on the mill porch. Stars out. Quiet road. No cars. No lights except the moon. The air was cool. Spring hadn't fully arrived yet in that part of Kentucky. Eunice leaned into Harold's shoulder and said, "Maybe this is where we were supposed to end up." Harold held her hand. For the first time in weeks, neither of them was afraid. The bread was almost gone. They had $5 left. But sitting there on that broken porch with the sky wide open above them, it felt like the worst was over. Like maybe they'd finally landed somewhere the world couldn't push them out of. It wasn't over. Not even close. Dale Whitfield showed up 4 days later in a silver sedan that looked out of place on the dirt road. He was a tall man, mid-50s, with wire glasses and a leather bag over his shoulder. He shook Harold's hand, made small talk about the drive, and followed him inside. Harold led him to the opening in the floor. Dale looked down, didn't say anything. Harold handed him the flashlight. Dale went down alone. He was gone for 20 minutes. When he came back up, his face was different. The polite disinterest was gone. Completely gone. His hands were shaking. He set his bag down on the floor and looked at Harold like he was seeing him for the first time. "Mr. Sayer," he said, "do not let anyone else into this building. Do you understand me? No one. Now get this." Dale opened his bag, pulled out a small toolkit, and went back down. He opened one crate, then another, then a third. He took samples from the barrel seals, measured the humidity in the room with a device Harold had never seen, took photographs from every angle. He came up an hour later and sat on a fallen beam near the door and didn't speak for a full minute. Harold and Eunice just stood there watching him. Then he told them. These were pre-prohibition bourbon barrels. Some dated to 1919. The oldest ones were over 100 years old. If the seals were intact, and from what he could see they were, the bourbon inside had been aging in naturally perfect conditions for nearly a century. The stone basement kept a constant cool temperature. No sunlight, no vibration, no humidity fluctuation, no exposure to air. It was, in Dale's words, the most perfect accidental aging environment he had ever seen in 30 years of working with bourbon. He said he needed to make some calls. Harold said go ahead. Dale walked out to the porch, pulled out his phone and started dialing. Harold and Eunice sat inside and listened to him speaking in a voice that kept getting louder and faster with every call. Within 48 hours, a full appraisal team arrived from Lexington. 3 men with equipment Harold didn't recognize. Scanners, temperature probes, spectrometers. They spent 2 full days in the basement. They opened every crate, cataloged every barrel, tested every seal. The final count was 312 barrels. The conservative estimate of their total value was $47 million. I'll say that again so it lands the way it should. $47 million. For a couple who had $5 in their pocket and no roof over their heads 2 weeks earlier. But here's the thing nobody tells you about finding a fortune. The money doesn't come first. The trouble does. A local reporter in Harlan named Jess Brennan picked up the county property filing. She made a few calls. Somebody at the clerk's office talked. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, Harold and Eunice couldn't walk to the mill door without passing through a crowd of strangers. Reporters from Louisville, from Lexington, from Nashville, from as far away as New York. Camera crews parked along the dirt road. People standing in the weeds with their phones out, recording the mill like it was a crime scene. Lawyers calling the county clerk trying to get Harold's phone number. Bourbon companies sending representatives with business cards and handshakes and offers that came out too smooth and too fast. Harold stopped answering the door. Eunice stopped going outside during the day. They felt like prisoners in a building they'd bought for $1. And then the real threats came. The first one arrived by certified mail. A man named Curtis Ames, living in Pikeville, claiming to be a great-grandnephew of Virgil Ames, filed a legal claim against the bourbon. He said the barrels were personal property of the Ames family, that Harold had purchased the building, not its contents, that the contents of the basement were never part of the property sale and therefore belonged to the Ames estate. Harold read the letter twice. Then he folded it and put it in his shirt pocket next to the eviction notice he still carried. The second threat came from the county itself. Harlan County filed a motion arguing that the underground chamber was not included in the original land parcel. The basement, they said, was a separate structure, an undocumented addition. They claimed eminent domain over the basement and everything inside it. Their argument was simple. If the basement didn't exist on any property record, then Harold never bought it. 2 claims, 2 directions, both of them trying to take the only thing Harold and Eunice had left. Harold sat on the mill porch that night and stared at the dirt road. Eunice brought him a glass of water. He took it, didn't drink. He said, "We can't even afford a lawyer, Eunice." But he found one. A woman named Sandra Cole out of Lexington. She specialized in property disputes. She'd read about Harold's case in the paper and called the county clerk herself to get his number. She told Harold she'd take the case on contingency. No fee unless they won. She also told him the truth. This could take years. Multiple courts. Appeals. Motions. He might win. He might lose everything. Again. Harold was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've already lost everything once. At least this time I've got something to fight for." Meanwhile, the mill wasn't safe. 3 nights after the story broke, Harold heard a sound. It was past midnight. Footsteps above his head. He and Eunice had been sleeping on blankets near the basement entrance. Harold grabbed the flashlight and crept toward the stairs. The basement door was still chained. But when he went down and swept the light across the room, he saw it. One of the crates near the back wall had been opened. The lid was off. A barrel had been pulled halfway out. The seal was cracked. Someone had been inside. Found another way in. Maybe through the collapsed section of the east wall. Maybe through a gap Harold hadn't noticed. Nothing was taken, but the damage was done. If barrels started disappearing, the value of the collection would drop. And worse, it would give the county ammunition. They could argue Harold couldn't secure the property, that the bourbon was at risk, that the county should seize it for safekeeping. Harold bought a padlock the next morning with his last dollar. He chained the basement door shut from the inside, nailed boards over the gap in the east wall, and from that night on, he slept in front of the basement entrance. 74 years old. Bad knees. Sleeping on a stone floor with a chain across his chest and a flashlight in his hand. Eunice brought him a blanket and a pillow. She didn't argue. She didn't try to talk him out of it. She just lay down beside him on the cold floor and said, "If they come back, they'll have to deal with both of us. If this story has you gripped, go ahead and subscribe. You won't want to miss what Harold does next." Now here's where it turns. Sandra Cole was good. Better than good. She didn't just argue the case. She dismantled it. She went straight to the county records office and spent 3 days going through every document related to the mill property dating back to 1910. And what she found changed everything. Virgil Ames never owned the mill. He leased it. The original deed, filed in 1918, showed the property belonged to Harlan County. Ames operated the mill under a 10-year lease that expired in 1928. He never renewed it. He just stayed. Nobody came to collect. When he vanished in 1933, the county reclaimed the property and everything on it. The Ames family had no deed, no title, no record of ownership. There was no Ames estate with legal standing to file a claim. Curtis Ames had nothing. Sandra filed a motion to dismiss. The judge reviewed the county records. The Ames claim was thrown out in 9 days. The county's eminent domain motion went to a circuit judge named Roy Abner. Sandra argued her case in person. She brought an engineer who testified that the basement was structurally part of the building. The stone walls of the basement supported the foundation of the mill above. The floor joists rested directly on the basement ceiling beams. You couldn't separate the basement from the building any more than you could separate a house from its cellar. The $1 sale included the building and all fixed structures on the parcel. The basement was a fixed structure. End of argument. Judge Abner agreed. The county's motion was denied. The ruling was unanimous. Harold and Eunice Sayer legally owned every barrel, every crate, every square inch of that basement. The bourbon world moved fast after that. Offers came in waves. A historic distillery in Frankfurt offered $12 million for the entire collection. A private investment group from Chicago offered $22 million. A collector from Japan offered $31 million for just the pre-1920 barrels. Harold didn't take any of them. He sat on the porch, read every offer letter carefully, folded them up, and put them in a shoebox under the stairs. Instead, he hired an auction house in Louisville, a firm that specialized in rare spirits and estate collections. They cataloged every barrel individually, verified every seal, photographed every date stamp, published a detailed inventory with provenance notes tracing each barrel back to Virgil Ames and his operation during Prohibition. And they set a date, June 14th. The auction took place over 2 days in a converted warehouse in downtown Louisville. Buyers came from 11 countries. Bidding started on a Tuesday morning and didn't end until Wednesday night. 304 barrels sold. 8 were too fragile to move safely and were preserved in place at the mill as historical artifacts. The final hammer price, before fees and taxes, was $47.3 million. After the auction house took their cut, and the state and federal government took theirs, Harold and Eunice Sayer netted just over $28 million. Believe me, $28 million. For a man who had been sleeping on a stone floor with a chain across his chest 2 months earlier. But Harold didn't celebrate. He didn't buy a new car, didn't buy a suit, didn't fly anywhere or hire anyone to carry his bags. He didn't call David or Karen. He drove the same rusted pickup truck back to the mill. Eunice rode beside him. Same seat. Same suitcase between her feet. Same quiet between them. But different now. Something had shifted. Not in what they had. In what they knew they could do with it. They sat on the porch. Same spot. Same stars. Same quiet road. And Harold told Eunice what he wanted to do. He said, "I want to go home." She said, "We don't have one." He said, "Then let's build one. Not just for us." Now get this. Because what Harold did next is the reason I'm telling you this story. It's not the bourbon. It's not the money. It's not the courtroom wins. It's this. He went back to the street they'd been evicted from. The block Jean Platt had sold to the developer from Louisville. The developers hadn't broken ground yet. They were still waiting on permits and zoning approvals. Harold's lawyer made a call. Then another. Then a third. Negotiations took 6 weeks. When they were done, Harold Sayer had bought every house on that street. 7 homes. He paid full market price. Didn't negotiate. Didn't try to get a deal. Didn't ask for a discount. He paid what they were worth because he knew what they were worth. He'd lived in one of them for 11 years. Then he did something nobody expected. He offered every home rent-free to elderly tenants facing the same situation he and Eunice had faced. People over 65 who'd been displaced by developers, by rising rents, by family who couldn't or wouldn't take them in. People who'd been told they had 14 days. People whose children said there was no space. People who had $7 and no door to walk through. Harold put the word out through the county clerk, through churches, through the same legal aid office that had put him on hold for 3 hours and then disconnected him. Within a month, every house on that street was full. 7 families. All of them safe. None of them paying a dime. Harold restored the mill too. He brought in contractors from Lexington. They reinforced the foundation, rebuilt the roof, repaired every floor so no one's foot would ever go through a board again, replaced the windows, ran electricity and plumbing for the first time in the building's history. The basement was sealed and preserved as a registered historical site. The Kentucky Historical Society placed a bronze marker by the road. The ground level became a community center. A small library in one corner with books Harold and Eunice picked out themselves. A kitchen for community meals that Eunice organized every Thursday evening. A room with tables and chairs where people could come and sit and talk and not feel like they had nowhere to go. Eunice planted a garden behind the mill. Tomatoes, beans, peppers, squash, marigolds along the borders because she said they kept the bugs out. She called it the porch garden because she could see it from the same spot on the porch where they'd sat that first night with nothing but stale bread and stars above them. Harold and Eunice moved into a small house at the end of the street. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms. 1 bathroom. A kitchen with a window that closed all the way. A porch with 2 wooden chairs. Harold built those chairs himself. Took him a week because his knees weren't what they used to be. But he finished them, sanded them smooth, set them side by side facing the road. On their kitchen table sat 1 barrel. The 1919 barrel. The oldest one in the entire collection. Unopened. Harold had kept it from the auction. Told the auction house it wasn't for sale. They pushed back. Said it was worth over $2 million on its own. Harold said he understood. Said he didn't care. Said some things have a value you can't put a number on. A reporter came by one afternoon. A young woman from the Lexington Herald-Leader. She sat on the porch with Harold and Eunice and asked her questions. She asked Harold why he gave the money away. Why he didn't keep it. Why he didn't move somewhere warm or buy a big house. Harold leaned back in his chair and looked down the street. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because I remember what it feels like to have $7 and no door to walk through. And I decided nobody on this street would ever feel that way again." She asked Eunice about the barrel. Why they wouldn't sell it. Eunice placed her hand on Harold's. She looked at the reporter with steady eyes and said, "That barrel survived 100 years in the dark waiting for someone to find it. So did we. Some things aren't for selling. They're for reminding you that the worst day of your life might just be the door to the best one." The reporter wrote it down. Every word. It ran on the front page the following Sunday. Harold still drives that rusted pickup. still parks it in the same spot in the driveway. Eunice still waters flowers every morning. Only now, she waters the ones along 7 walkways instead of 1. Neighbors wave to her from their porches. She waves back, calls most of them by name. On quiet evenings, Harold sits on the porch in the chair he built. Eunice brings him coffee in the same mug she's used for 30 years. He takes it from her. Their fingers touch the way they always have. Without thinking about it. Without needing to. He looks down the street. Every light is on. Every house is full. Children from the neighborhood ride their bikes past the mill. The garden is growing. The library has books people actually read. The kitchen smells like soup on Thursdays. Harold takes a sip of his coffee. Doesn't say anything. Doesn't need to. Some folks spend their whole lives looking for treasure. Harold Sayer wasn't looking for anything. He was just trying to find a place to sleep. And that made all the difference.